Hare Krishna and good evening, dear devotees. Thank you very much for joining us for the 9th episode of the Mini Moons podcast. Tonight, by popular demand, we have Garuda Prabhu again visiting us as our guest speaker. And tonight, we will be discussing Srila Prabhupada's troubling statements and how we can face them. So, as many of us who have been reading Srila Prabhupada's books or listening to his lectures have probably experienced, we might encounter some comments that we find quite controversial or even upsetting. And then we might want to just ignore them and not deal with them. But at some point in our devotional lives, we have to face these comments and without denying them, try to develop a deeper understanding so we can integrate them in a healthy way. Now, Garuda Das has been practicing Bhakti Yoga for over 50 years. He received both Harinam and Brahminical initiations from His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Śrīla Prabhupāda. He was also blessed by Śrīla Prabhupāda to enter the academic world, wherein he eventually received 3 master's degrees, a doctorate in comparative religion from Harvard University. From there on, he became the first Bhakta to become an established university professor, now holding university positions in 2 different universities. And he was also the first Bhakta to publish books on Krishna Bhakti with world-class academic and trade publishers. Since then, he's been guiding younger devotee scholars and has become the gatekeeper for academic Krishna Bhakti-related publications, and also a senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada bestowed on him the title of Kabiraj. Over the years, he has served as a consultant for ISKCON leadership and as a guide for devotional writing. He has also counseled hundreds of devotees in ISKCON in a professional capacity. He is also an original member of the Bhaktivedanta Institute group, established by Bhakti Swarup Damodar Goswami, who himself, as we know, was also a scholar. He has had a long-standing relationship with the BBT since 1982, including 2 major BBT grant projects. And currently he's invited to lecture around the world at ISKCON temples, yoga centers, and of course at major universities and institutions such as the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., where he has offered over 3 dozens of lectures. So we are very honored to have Garuda Prabhu back with us tonight, and we are aware that he's a person that has been contemplating on these statements and how we can understand them and also explain them to others. So thank you, Prabhu, for gracing us with your presence again tonight.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, to you, Sharadia Rasa, and to you, Dia. And wonderful opportunity to be with you again.
Thank you so much. So, Prabhu, just before we get into the actual crux of the conversation, can we pick up something around the concept of troubling? So, as the kind of session title today says, how do we approach troubling statements made by Srila Prabhupada? So, how do we understand this concept of troubling?
Yes. Troubling statements, I think, could be defined as statements made by Prabhupada that cause us to stop and try to make sense of them. Something that doesn't make sense to us right away. Something that can even cause some cognitive dissonance. Prabhupada says X, but in our experience, we experience Y. How do I deal with that? But Prabhupada is this great Vaishnava authority, in some sense the ultimate Vaishnava authority, and yet, am I going to betray my own honest experience? How do I work with that dissonance, that conflict? Troubling can also mean to outsiders. Troubling the way things can appear to outsiders. So your teacher is a misogynist. Well, I've never thought of my teacher as a misogynist, Actually, he loved his female disciples. But what about this statement? What about that statement? And you can, with an easy click of the internet, with the computer on the internet, combine all of the statements that Prabhupada makes about women. And even when interviewing some senior Vaishnavis, who are also my good friends, even some of them had no idea how many statements Prabhupada has made about women that, frankly, are, they found a bit disturbing. They don't know how to negotiate these statements that don't quite feel right. And you know what's troubling to me, Dee and Sharadiya Rasa, what's troubling to me is when I see devotees straining to accommodate things that are truly compromising to themselves. And this is the stuff that breaks faith. This is, apashraddha. This is against their own hearts. And this is troubling to me, to watch devotees go through this kind of strain and pain.
No, thank you for that, Prabhu. And it's your point about, you described it as, how we work with that conflict, certain things that we may hear Prabhupada say, then that causes us to have that inner conflict. So we were talking about facing these, and you also mentioned the point about how it troubles you watching people trying to kind of comprehend this juxtaposition of almost certain different concepts that just doesn't add up or that contradicts themselves. So should we be facing, frankly, if it's
You kind of dwindled out a little bit there in the
causing
Dee?
conflict?
I'm not hearing you.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I think she might have had a bit of a connection issue.
I was just
Yeah, there's a bit of a connection issue, I think. Dee? Yeah, she's even freezing up a bit. And
Okay.
it could be due to ecstasy somehow, but I think it's really due to a electronic issue. Yeah.
Yes, so Dee, can you maybe just rephrase your question? See if the connection's better now.
Sorry, if I'm back. Can you hear me now okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So Prabhu, you mentioned, I don't know at which point I disappeared, but you mentioned that, it's all about people, coming, hearing these statements and then facing that inner conflict because they sort of grapple to comprehend these statements. So if it's causing people that much distress and it says it kind of makes you sad or uncomfortable watching devotees go through this. So should we be facing some might, comprehend?
Yes. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Thanks, Dee. I take the word in our title for today, facing. Facing, means encountering honestly. First of all, to be honest with oneself about how one feels in relation to a particular statement that is troubling. That takes courage, That takes courage. Many devotees may hesitate even think about facing these things because they don't want to even question the Acharya, the founder Acharya. They don't even want to question. They don't want to commit the Hatimata offense. They don't want to, seem faithless in light of others. It can be embarrassing. So really, to face the troubling statements takes a certain amount of courageousness, but it also takes a certain amount of discernment. You face them, though, with the right people. Don't face them with the wrong people. Don't face these troubling statements with devotees who themselves have kind of repressed what is troubling and have decided to take on the troubling statements at a very sort of dark level, that they've not known how to properly discern what Prabhupada is really saying. Okay? So, statements can be taken in a kind of Kanishta level. Statements can be taken at a Madhyama level, and statements can be taken at an Uttama level. And depending on how we deliberate on these things, will be important for understanding when we do decide to face these things. So, D and Sharadiya Rasa, if I'm saying something that doesn't seem quite right to you today, you have to speak up and say straightforwardly, Garuda, that doesn't make sense. This doesn't sit right with me. Or, hey, if I do say something right, you might want to let me know that too. Okay, that's also not forbidden. Okay, so yeah, it takes courageousness, D, to face the statements with the right sangha.
Thank you so much for sharing, Prabhu. What I'm also thinking is, you were emphasizing the importance of, facing the statements with the right devotees who, probably have already understood it at a higher level in a, healthy and integrated way. I'm also thinking another important consideration between, who made the statement, like certain statements, when Śrīla Prabhupāda makes it, because he's a pure devotee, when he says it, it's like coming from a transcendental platform, but then the same statement could be repeated by another person, and their intention, is to put someone down or to discourage someone or to attack someone. And I think that can also, create a challenge. And therefore, it's so important, who you discuss these things with, because a certain statement, if a person that you have a very strong and loving relationship with, if they say that statement, you're able to digest it. But if the same statement is said by a person, who you've experienced, conflict or tension with, then the statement will be much more challenging. It might be even, severely hurtful if they're saying it. So I think that's a major part of the statement. It's like we have to consider who is saying it, and also when we repeat them, is our motivation aligned, with the original speaker, whether that's Śrīla Prabhupada or whether that is, the Shastra.
Right. No, well said, Sharadiya Rasa. We can turn, I think there's a comment somewhere with Prabhupada who said, don't turn Shastra into Shastra. The difference of the long A and the short A. Shastra meaning scripture, Shastra meaning weapons. Mm-hmm. So don't turn Shastra into a Shastra. Mm-hmm. We're not here to use Shastra to put each other down. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's quite the contrary. We're here to lift one another up with Shastra. Mm-hmm. That is our only task.
Yes, I think that's a beautiful meditation on the purpose on Shastra. And now to move on to start facing some of these very, I think, well-known statements. The first one, I think, which all devotees know, is Śrīla Prabhupada many times actually said women are less intelligent than men. So, for instance, here is an example. It's a room conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Wax, a writer and editing manager of Playboy magazine. I find that quite interesting. July the 5th, 1975, Chicago. So Mrs. Wax starts the conversation and she says, could a woman be a temple president? Then Prabhupada says, yes, why not? Mrs. Wax says, glad to hear it. But then Prabhupada responds and he says, but because women are less intelligent, they should remain dependent on first-class father, first-class husband, and a first-class son. Then she is first-class. That is the injunction. Women should remain dependent in childhood upon first-class father, in youthhood upon first-class husband, and in old age upon first-class son. Woman is never independent. If she becomes independent, her life is not very good. She must agree to remain dependent on first-class father, first-class husband, and the first-class son. 3 stages. So Prabhupada is really emphasizing, the fact that women are less intelligent and therefore they need to depend on, a male superior.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in addressing this, let us first observe and prepare the way to understand this statement by understanding something of the nature of Prabhupada's discourse. Now, Prabhupada is a teacher and as a preacher, he used very dramatic language. And frankly, if I, as an intellectual and as an academic, were to make the kinds of statements that Prabhupada, would make offhandedly here and there, I would not be accepted in the intellectual world. To be perfectly straightforward and honest, Prabhupada can make hasty generalizations. He can work with false premises or assumptions. He can use biased and opinionated information. He can take a particular instance to be true for all instances. He can have a faulty source for information. This goes on. Assertions can be very counterintuitive and contrary to fact. The veracity of statements could be accepted totally on the basis of his authority and not an authority with which he's working. It's really quite. To be as objective as possible. We just have to call it out. Prabhupada was. So why was Prabhupada careless like this? We could say careless, but I want to literally mean the word careless. He just didn't care about these things so much. This is my opinion. This is my take. He had a kind of vairagya carelessness. That is to say, he could care less about the moon. Did we arrive at the moon? Did we not arrive at the moon? At one point he said, well, even if they did get to the moon, he would switch around. My good friend and Vaishnavi sister, Urmila Dasi, said to me once, there's very little that Prabhupada wrote that he doesn't contradict. How about that? Now, Urmila is very knowledgeable. She's a very trusted God sister of mine, and we have years of discussion about Prabhupada's discourse and his teachings. And I really find this to be true. You can't simply take one instance of something that Prabhupada says as if it's the whole story. That's one thing. Secondly, and we'll do that with this assertion that Prabhupada makes: women are less intelligent than men. Secondly, he makes a generalization here, an absolute generalization. That means all women in the world are less intelligent than any man in the world. Now, come on, let's get real. Okay, let's get real here. I've met some women in my profession who, frankly, are they've surpassed me, and not that I'm the brightest bulb in the room here, but they've surpassed me in academic and scholarly ability and prowess and so on. Extraordinary. So what does Prabhupada mean? Why is he saying this? What is intended here? Well, the first thing about a lot of these topics, a lot of these troubling statements is they really have very little to do with the essence of the Vaishnava teachings for which he completely dedicated his life. They all are peripheral statements. They're not paravidya, to use his term, paravidya, but they're aparavidya. They're in the realm of aparavidya. So how important are these statements? Okay. On the other hand, he did say them. So what does Prabhupada mean when he says women are less intelligent than men? Well, first of all one has to do is be a discerning reader of the Bhagavad Gita and see that this is simply it can't be held as fully true. I once explained this to Vishaka Devi, another dear sister of mine, whom I've known for decades. In fact, she even incorporated this thing that I'm about to say in her book. When you make the assertion that women are less intelligent than men, we have to add a few things. First of all, generally, women are less intelligent than men in the ways that men are generally more intelligent. But the necessary corollary to this is that men are generally less intelligent than women in the ways that women are generally intelligent. There are two different kinds of intelligences, and that's right there in the Bhagavad Gita. One of the several qualities of the feminine that Krishna mentions is intelligence. Now, if Prabhupada is saying that women are less intelligent than men, then how come Krishna is bringing out one of the qualities of the feminine as intelligence? Now, the word Krishna uses the word medha, which is different than buddhi, which is used in the rest of the Gita to refer to intelligence, although I translate it as the faculty of discernment. But both essentially mean intelligence, but they each have a little bit different sense. And that's because women generally have a different kind of intelligence, not that it's utterly different than a man's, but there's a certain flavor, a certain coloring of a woman's intelligence that's different than the coloring of a man's intelligence. And that's why generally you have a male and female raising a child. Now, I'm sorry if I'm sounding too traditional here and too binary, okay, for today's, extremely nuanced layering of the gender identifications. But generally it takes a male and a female to have a kid. I mean, at least biologically. And there is something to be said about both intelligences. Is it impossible for, my son got his doctorate in mathematics from Cornell. There were 15 people in his class. 14 were males. 1 was a woman. Well, I guess they should have kicked out the woman. What are you doing here? I mean, this is like male stuff. Why are you there? Well, she was brilliant. She belonged there. The one person in the world that's supposed to have the highest IQ, if you work with IQ, intelligent quotient tests that psychologists will use, that the person who achieves the highest is a woman. Now, that really does a lot to my masculinity, honestly. I'm really feeling emasculated when I hear this, and I'm just sharing with you all, and I don't know what to do about it, but tough, it's a woman. Okay, now, so my point is that Prabhupada is speaking from a male, from a sannyasin vairagya stance. He's not speaking accurately or terribly carefully, because he doesn't really care about this stuff that much. That's my perception. He has a kind of vairagya carelessness. He doesn't bother to find out whether it's true psychologically for women to like certain things, but yet he will say it is a fact. It is psychology. It is a psychological fact. It is a psychological fact. Well, it's, I don't know what facts he's talking about, but it doesn't jive with the status of modern psychology. So, this is what I put forward for this matter. But some of the things I said for this statement will also apply to some other statements that we'll look at.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I think what is interesting, the discussion or the discourse that's currently, going on, that is focusing on the idea that, gender roles are just a social construct, that is more happening in the field of the social sciences. But if we look at the field of, say, neuroscience, they have established that, in general, women and men's brains work differently. They wouldn't say the one is superior to the other, but they've got different benefits, depending on, different functions. So I
Yes.
think that also kind of aligns with what you were pointing out, that there is, different types of, like, a masculine intelligence and a feminine intelligence. Could you say maybe a little bit more about what is the difference between, you said, in some places in the Gita they speak about buddhi, which you said is more discernment, and then you said there's another type of intelligence. So could you just differentiate again for us a bit more clearly what's the difference between those two types of intelligence?
Yes. The word medha is a really interesting word. It has the sense of a kind of nourishing intelligence, a kind of sort of a more of a heart intelligence, more of a emotional intelligence. It's these things can be difficult to sort of define. Medha also has a sense of wisdom, and not mere intelligence. Medha, a sense of wisdom. I mean, look, most of my grade school teachers were women. I had one male teacher who was my 5th grade teacher. I can't believe I can remember all the way back. I remember his name, if you can believe that. Okay, I mean, most of the time I can't remember anything. But in any case, it's not, unreasonable to think that women can be better grade teachers, grade school teachers than men. There, there's more care and a more of sort of a giving intelligence that's there than perhaps buddhi, which is more kind of heady and not. And again, medha and buddhi, they have a different flavor to them. Both happen to be, by the way, in the feminine gender in Sanskrit, although I don't know that has great significance. But the idea is that there's medha has a different feeling about it, has more of a sense of wisdom, more of a sense of a nourishing wisdom, if I could put it that way. See, I don't know because I'm not a woman, so I don't. You
Thank
both
you,
would have to
Prabhu.
tell me.
But I think the point you meant, we touched upon that point around emotional intelligence and how Medha has that nourishing aspect to the wisdom, and which is right, because I've had instances where male bosses have asked me to have conversations with certain line reports because they've frankly said, you being a lady, even if you need to tell somebody off, you could probably do it in a better way than I could. So I've had to in certain
Yeah,
situations genuinely,
yeah,
tell people off very kindly, but bosses have said, if it comes straight from me, it's just going to sound a little bit too harsh, maybe, particularly if the person on the receiving end is a bit of a delicate
yes,
personality. So I get the idea between the sort of difference. Conscious with delve, it's a very interesting and a very important point that gets a question or a statement that gets thrown about quite often. But I'm keen to move us on to the next one, which is also something that is quite that could be misinterpreted, or that something could get a lot of people frankly quite wound up. This is a statement that whereby Prabhupada sort of insisted that women cannot be leaders. So in an instance where where he was talking to a female reporter. He just mentioned that Prabhupada mentioned that women cannot be leaders, and his questioning were, and then the reporter asked, so the reason why women cannot be leaders, and he said it's a fact. In the history, there's no woman who is a big philosopher, a big mathematician, a big scientist, a big educationist. We don't find. They were all men. And the woman reporter said, what about women who are leaders of countries such as your own? So the reporter, female reporter, was referring to Mrs. Gandhi, who was then ruling caretaking India. And Prabhupada then said, well, according to Vedic conception, woman is never offered leadership, but experience has shown that woman's leadership has not been successful. And the female reporter then asks, do you think Mrs. Gandhi's leadership has not been successful? So Prabhupada then replies saying, well, there's already trouble. There are many big men. They do not agree with her, and she has taken emergency steps. So, on the whole, the country is in trouble. So the female reporter then asks, what about Mrs. Mayer, the president of Israel? And Prabhupada says, I do not say of any particular woman, but according to Vedic civilization, we have never seen in the history that a woman has become a leader. So, 2 points really. So, how would somebody, particularly a 21st century modern woman, trying to, embrace ISKCON, listen to this and then kind of feel that, oh, okay, I'm a 21st century woman, maybe perhaps with aspirations. And there's the founder Acharya saying no women could be leaders. In the Vedic civilizations, there were no female leaders. Therefore, women cannot be leaders. So, how can we comprehend this statement? And also, you being a philosopher yourself and an academic, is this statement true? Is there no history of female leaders in the Vedic civilization?
Well, in the Vedic civilization, we don't have a lot of information about the Vedic civilization. But in terms of the historical eye of a Western scholar, there are women leaders of the past. I mean, there was, Queen Nefertiti in Egypt. And what about what about in England? Margaret Thatcher. I mean, she was a running leader for 17 years or something. I think she was there for a long time. Now, I'm not saying everyone liked her, but I mean, I think many people think she did really an astonishingly good job. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a political science scholar, so I can't speak authoritatively.
Queen Victoria, for instance,
Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth.
Empire, Queen Elizabeth.
Queen Elizabeth ran the kingdom for 41 years or so, longer than any, I think.
Well, she celebrated her 70th platinum anniversary recently. So, 70 years.
Oh, I meant the first Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, the first queen, but her, the current Queen Elizabeth II. She just celebrated a platinum jubilee last week.
That's right. That's right. However, but as a queen now, she's not really imbued with powers. Whereas the first Queen Elizabeth, she ran the kingdom. I mean, she really ran the kingdom. So, again, but let me tell you this. I know very few males that can run a kingdom too. In fact, I don't have any friends that I would have faith being the president of the United States, honestly. Okay? I have no friends. I know, in fact, all my life, I've never met a male who I feel would be competent enough to run the United States. So what does that say about men? Here's the point. Why do I say that? When we're speaking in generalizations, there's not any reason why we should think that any male would be competent enough to run the country. This would take a very particular kind of male or a very particular kind of female with very particular kinds of experiences and proclivities to be able to take up that task. We have to get away from generalizations. Prabhupada would use generalizations, but he would do so to be dramatic, in my opinion. And he also really, again, had this kind of vairagya carelessness. And I don't mean this in a pejorative way at all. What I mean is that these things, in some sense, ultimately don't matter. And again, it's aparavidya. It's not paravidya. And paravidya is what matters. Love of God.
Thank you, Prabhu. Sharade, did you have any follow-up questions or comments on that?
Yes, Prabhu. I think, as some time has passed, since Prabhupada was present, I just think that, we've observed more, women serving as leaders. And I think what has come forward is that we can definitely say women have a different leadership style, as in comparison to men. And I mean, and that's been confirmed, in many studies and across, many different fields. And I think that, corresponds to the idea that women have a different type of intelligence. So, maybe when Prabhupada is referring to leadership, he's referring to a very specific type of leadership as well. And,
Right.
something that's maybe very authoritarian, etc. And we can see that, many women would not excel, in that type of role. But at the same time, we cannot deny that, certain women have not been, successful leaders in their countries, and have not also made, I think, significant contributions, in many fields. Because I mean, Prabhupada is also speaking about scientists and philosophers, etc. And we know that, currently we can name several ladies in basically all fields who are, leaders, in their fields. So yeah, I think things are definitely changing. And I think it's also, again, what do you define as leadership? What do you define as intelligence? And I think that definitely has an influence on how you then, what your criteria then is for successful leadership, on whether someone can or cannot actually fulfill that role.
Yeah, I mean, Sharadi, the question, this by way of extension, this could be we could be talking about, should there be female Diksha gurus, for example, which is considered in ISKCON a kind of leadership role, or whether there should be female GBCs and so on. Again, I don't deal with generalizations like this. Should there be a female Diksha guru? I know lots of devotee women that should never be taking care of other people's spiritual lives. And I know lots of men, frankly, if they were trying to do that, I'd be horrified, honestly. Okay? I mean, so it's not about gender. It's about individual proclivities, propensities, qualifications. Is every, you have a master's in education, I think, right, Sharadiya Rasa? Well, is everyone...
in the process.
Okay, in the process, okay. Do you go out there and say that everyone should get a master's of education? Everyone. I mean, every woman. Of course you don't. I mean, this is your particular swadharma, your seva, the way your devotional life is forming around certain kinds of things that you can offer uniquely. It has nothing to do with gender. For a movement who heard from its teacher, its founding teacher, you're not this body, I'm confounded constantly by the fact that the body becomes such an important guiding factor for so many devotees. It's totally anathema to bhakti. Utterly has nothing to do with bhakti. Because in seva, no one can limit the ways that bhakti seva takes, the forms that bhakti seva takes. You cannot do that. If you can do it, then it's something less than bhakti. If you can say that someone should not do something in bhakti, even though it's their natural propensity to do so, then what you are doing is you are constricting the absolute value of bhakti, and really now you're doing something else, maybe varnashrama, maybe the Vedic way, maybe we're supposed to keep women in submission to men. Again, these kinds of statements can be misused.
I think one thing that came to my mind, Prabhu, is that Prabhupada had a certain perspective on what is the psychology of a woman, and what is, say, needed for leadership. And I think the point Prabhupada was trying to make is that a woman's psychology, is not suited to leadership. But I think for us now, one possible way of understanding it is certain types of psychology wouldn't be, suitable for leadership. And as you pointed out, many people, regardless of whether they're men or women, would not simply be suited for leadership.
That's right.
But at the same time, we cannot then, make generalizations and use someone's gender when it comes to criteria for doing a service. And I think that's where we get stuck. I mean, it's one thing to say that there are differences between the genders. We do not deny that. But then to make gender a prerequisite to do certain services, I think that is where we go wrong. And this doesn't only happen, when it comes to like the highest leadership positions in ISKCON, say, being a Diksha Guru, being a temple president. We also see it in, other service areas where being a woman just immediately disqualifies you, from even being considered for the service. And I think what you were pointing out, that is opposed to bhakti. Not the idea that there's gender differences, but then using it as a form to exclude people from devotional service. That's an issue.
Yeah. It absolutely is. I agree with you, and in fact, it even gets kind of, in my mind, sort of foul to say that women can't be, gurus until they are past a certain, period in their lives. Well, what about men? I mean, aren't some men really like hormonally out of control? I mean, come on. You start measuring female hormones and you start, saying what, state or part of their lives is appropriate. And well, then we should measure the hormonal levels of men. And then, excuse me, Prabhu, but we can't accept you as a sannyasin because you're just a little too hormonal. Okay. You did a test and no, it's not going to work. Okay, so just wait another 40 years and then we can reconsider you. Come on, this is getting absurd. This is just getting so absurd. It's what one has a passion to do in devotional service. Where is one's passion? Where is one's energy focused? And how do we most desire to serve Krishna, to please the hearts of devotees, and to connect with the hearts of all living beings, all humans and all living beings? This is what Prabhupada said is love. This is love. Love means that we love everyone. Love means that we love the animals. Love means that, and we draw from the love that Krishna gives to us. So this is what it should be based on, not these. Now, there are, of course, particular circumstances that we all should consider. Maybe I can't travel and preach the way I used to because of age, or maybe I've got more energy now than I used to. Maybe I had a sickness back of 20 years ago, but I've gotten over. I mean, you can't generalize. You just can't generalize. It just doesn't work.
So, Prabhu, the last thing I want to just say on this specific topic is that I think when Prabhupada spoke in general, he did generalize. But when it came to dealing with individual devotees, he didn't seem to generalize. He seemed to engage people according to their propensity, their ability, and also, as you said, their passion. Not as a mode of passion, but what enthuses them in life and their dharma.
Yes, beautiful. In fact, you know what? I'd like to embellish your statement, your observation. just as Krishna states, what the whole philosophy of palatyaga is in the beginning of the Gita, what sacrifice is, what jnana yoga is, and what yogis do. In the 8th chapter, you're supposed to die during the waxing of the moon, not the waning of the moon. All of these things he sets forth. But ultimately, he says, I don't care about any of this. Just love me. I've been desiring you. Ishtosi me dhritamiti. I so much desire you. I so much love you. Please, come to me without any of these dharmas. Now, I've given you all these dharmas. I've shown you absolutely what all these dharmas are about. And then he gets very personal with Arjuna. He says, just love me as I've been loved. Reciprocate my love for you. And that's what it's all about. It's that bhakti is personal. So you're right. When Prabhupada would write these letters, oh my gosh, close to 7,000 letters. This is, honestly, I don't know how Prabhupada did that. And with everything else, Prabhupada is look, from anyone's account, externally, internally, he was a master mind and a master heart. He connected with the hearts of his individual disciples all the time through letters. He was very accommodating. I was right there when one GBC devotee at the time, way back in the day, where he had taken sannyas, and he talked to me about it. He said, Garuda, I don't feel properly situated as a sannyasin. That's just not my ashram, So I'm going to ask Prabhupada formally if I can return to my wife. And he wrote, I was right there with this whole transaction. And he wrote to Prabhupada. He read the letter he wrote to Prabhupada to me. And we waited until, back then we didn't have email, with instant, response and all that. There was always aerograms. I don't think you guys even know what an aerogram is. But anyway, it's this funny little one-piece thing that you write on and you'd fold up with little sticky edges, and then it would form into an envelope, and you'd write the address internationally, and you'd stick it in the mailbox. I don't know, aerogram. I have some. I can even show you because I have letters from way back then. But Prabhupada responded and said that essentially, normally this is considered a fall down when the sannyasin, leaves that ashram. But you have a good Krishna conscious wife, and if you are able to perform more vigorous devotional service, then it will be seen as a victory, something along those lines. He's very encouraging, very accommodating. With another devotee who was very close to Prabhupada, one of his servants, he revealed that he's actually not marriage type with a woman. He'd rather be with a man. And Prabhupada said, well, if you find a nice, Krishna conscious boy, and you both can perform devotional service together, and then this will be fine. And meanwhile, of course, he's making the absolute statement that homosexuality is demonic. Okay, so you see that you can't take a single statement that Prabhupada makes and consider it the absolute understanding of Prabhupada's position. Prabhupada had an extraordinarily compassionate and loving heart for his disciples. But he was also strict. When he didn't like something, he made it clear. He said, in fact, that was one of the scary things for me when I submitted my master's thesis, my first master's thesis to Prabhupada. Whether Prabhupada would even accept the fact that I was on my way to Harvard, whether I wrote this this master's thesis on the Chaitanya Charitamrita for some very famous professors at the University of Chicago. And Prabhupada not only, leafed through the whole master's degree thesis, but he heard my letter about what I'm going to be doing at Harvard, and he encouraged me in the most wonderful words. He could have said, tell Garuda to stop. This is no good. Why? Because modern education is a slaughterhouse. I will not be sending my disciples to slaughterhouses. Tell them to stop. He said just the opposite. So you see, just as Krishna was so loving, delivering so-called absolute teachings of Dharma, behind all those teachings, he was lovingly connecting with Arjuna. And in the end, he said, his last instruction, his last words, chapter 18, verse 72, with a rhetorical question, he said, have you heard this whole teaching with thought focused on the single highest point? The single highest point. And this is what I bring out in my translation of the Gita, is that single highest point is, please love me. I've been loving you for an eternity. When are you going to turn to me? That's the single highest point, and everything else is secondary. That's bhakti.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I think you've really made it very clear that although Prabhupada did make absolute statements when it came to individuals, he would always deal with them with a lot of care and a lot of compassion. And his major, and I think his actually only concern, was how to facilitate their devotional service.
Absolutely. But that Sharadiya Rasa, my point is also that Krishna did the same thing with Arjuna. He was very absolute about sacrifice, very absolute about palatyaga. I have some colleagues that think the whole Gita is about palatyaga. I said, really? Is that right? I have godbrothers or godsisters that think the whole teaching is about varnashrama, being Vedic. And I say, oh, really? Is that so? What Prabhupada was addressing was the impoverishment of the heart. Whether we're from affluent societies or poor societies, the impoverishment of the heart. He talked about the dormant love of God. He talked about the love of God. This phrase is used hundreds and hundreds of times. He speaks about the Supreme and the Supreme Personality of Godhead 35,000 times. Uses words, a derivative from Supreme Person, Supreme Personality of God, 35,000 times. Clearly, this is where Prabhupada was focused. This is the gift he came to give us.
Now, Prabhu, we've also heard from many of Prabhupada's female disciples that their personal experiences with him was that he was very warm, he was very kind, he was very encouraging. We also have many accounts where they experienced how Prabhupada expressed a lot of care and concern for their well-being. And I'm also aware there was an instance where certain GBC members wanted to make a suggestion that there should not be made any allowance for single mothers with children to live within the temple. And then when Prabhupada heard that statement, he was very disturbed. And he just became silent. And then they realized that, they had made a grave mistake. So that we do see. On the other hand, there's a statement which I remember the first time I came across it. I have to be honest, I was horrified. And I think many other women might have had the same experience. Now, I think it is important to take into account that Prabhupada did not make this statement again about a specific incident. And he certainly wasn't, speaking about anything that had necessarily, happened to a devotee within ISKCON. But Prabhupada did make the statement that although rape is not legally allowed, it's a fact that women like men who are very expert at rape. And this statement, comes up in a couple of, I don't think the books, but I think maybe even somewhere in the Bhagavatam, but it definitely has come up in a couple of conversations. So how do we understand this statement? I think from all the statements that I find challenging, this one definitely is the most challenging. Women like a man that's expert at rape. So how do we deal with this statement?
Okay, good. Okay, so in understanding Prabhupada's statements and understanding any philosophical statements at all, we have to begin with what the language says. Be very direct with that. And I've heard, one devotee that's well known try to rationalize that rape actually means, back in the colonialist days, it means this and that, and he all this convoluted twisting and turning, trying to make Prabhupada's statements sound gentlemanly and whatnot. So that was from one well-known devotee whose name I won't mention. And then there's another well-known devotee who actually posts his responses, and that way I could mention his name, Sannyasin. So here's a sannyasin who's never been married, doesn't know anything about women, talking about what women like. Okay, well, I've got, and now, no doubt, here's a guy right now, right here, speaking about this. Well, I can tell you from psychological studies, that this is simply, on the face of it, the statement is untrue. Now, so we need to ask, well, how is it true in the context of what Prabhupada is saying? We'll get there. But modern psychology has learned, and again, I don't have the figures on this, that many women do have nightmares about being raped, or their fears, because, after all, I hate to say it, but 1 out of every 4 women have a very bad experience. Men are abusive. Now here I'm making generalizations, right? Okay. Many men are very abusive. That there are plenty of men that are not. But the problem is that men are too easily insensitive, and then too often they're sick men that are sickly, men who are aggressive and violent, and there are women who are commensurately available for such interactions. Now, let me just say this, that the word rape is found 25 times throughout all of Prabhupada's books. Now, remember, I mentioned that the word supreme is mentioned 35,000 times. Okay, the word rape is mentioned 25 times, and only 10 of those times are found in the books. And the one place that really is so horrific for so many readers, not just women, but men, is this one passage that you're speaking of. In the fourth canto, I believe it's the 25th verse, yes, 41st purport. Now, men should also be alarmed at this statement, because who do women like? Men who are expert at rape. Now, if you're a man and you're not expert at rape, well, then what the hell kind of man are you? You should be expert at rape. So this picture is really dismal that Prabhupada is painting here. Men, they're expert, they're men who are very skilled at raping women, and women, there are women who like men who are very skilled in that way. Now, remember what we said earlier about generalizations. Prabhupada would have done better, I think, in helping people understand this passage if he had just put the word some women. Okay, that would have helped. Okay, because in fact, some women have a very sick relationship with men, and some men have a very sick relationship with women. Alcohol is often involved. Low intelligence, low consciousness. There's a lot of abuse, often in people's backgrounds. This can cause men and women to enter into some very dark and sick kinds of interactions. And in fact, if we look at the purport prior to this one, Prabhupada speaks about sex addictions, where they see, Prabhupada even says, I've got quotes here. We may not have time to go into all the quotes that I've got here, but I'll be writing this up shortly. But, someone who thinks of sex as supreme, he says, this is someone who is addicted to sex. Now, this is not a word he uses loosely. The word addiction means, like any other addiction, like drug, alcohol, there are various kinds of addictions. An addiction means I will do anything to satisfy my addiction. I will use you, I will use that person, I will use this circumstance to satisfy my addiction. For example, drug addictions are famous for crimes because they run out of money to pay for those expensive drugs. They'll break into stores. They will do anything. And the same thing with men who have a sickness, who are in tamasaguna. And Prabhupada does say, if you read all of Prabhupada's statements, he does actually qualify the statement he makes in Canto 4, Chapter 25. Is it Chapter 25? Chapter 25 and verse 41 purport. He does qualify elsewhere that this is for Rajasa and Tamasaguna, that men in Tamasaguna and women in Tamasaguna, yes, there are women who like men who are expert at rape, and men are expert at rape by tricking a woman into doing something that she doesn't want, but that she does want on a sick level. So we're talking about very sick, addictive levels of female-male interactions. Or possibly male, same-sex. Prabhupada even says in one place that rape only happens with women. Well, that's not true. You see my point. Prabhupada makes all kinds of statements that frankly aren't completely true. So why do we honor Śrīla Prabhupada? Why are we still sitting here as students, as lifetime students of Prabhupada? Because he delivered the gifts of bhakti, and his kind of flippant, dismissive, careless, what I call vairagya, careless statements are in some sense his way of saying, does this really matter? Let's get to the business of love of God. This is the way I take it. And it's not paravidya, it's aparavidya. Now, I will also mention that Prabhupada makes statements in this passage that are also careless in the sense of specificity. For example, he takes the statement, let me see if I can find it here. I tried to throw some statements in front of me. Yes. A man is always famous for his aggression toward a beautiful woman, and such aggression is sometimes considered rape. Whoa. Okay. Whoa. Rewind here. Okay. Rewind. He's using a double definition of aggression. You see, aggression can mean, okay, so let me give you my translation of this statement. A man is generally known, now vikyata, he says that this word always famous, first of all, the word always is not there. He put that in there. Famous is vikyata. Okay, so the word vikyata in Sanskrit can mean famous, not always famous, famous. But a primary meaning of the word means generally known. So there you go, generally known. Okay, so let's be careful here. A man, this is my translation of a statement. A man is generally known for his assertive advances toward a woman whom he considers attractive. I believe that's what Prabhupada is trying to say as a translator of Sanskrit, but also a theological translator of statements. Okay. Now, when Prabhupada, the word here is famous for his aggression. Let's look at the word aggression. Two meanings: hostile or violent behavior or attitudes toward another, readiness to attack or confront. That's first definition by OUP, Oxford University Press. The second one is forceful and sometimes overly assertive pursuit of one's aims and interests. Let me give you my translations of what Prabhupada means by aggression and the way he conflates the two. Number A definition, the hostile and violent behavior. This means violent advances unacceptable by a woman or acceptable by a sick or intoxicated woman as an expression of self-hatred and hatred coming from the man, with the intent to hurt or to be hurt, where there is certainly, and this is the key, no love. No love is there. And that's what makes it rape. Whether a woman wants a man who's expert at rape or not, there's no love, and it is dark and sick. Plain and simple. Now, definition B, forceful and sometimes overly assertive pursuit of one's aims and interests. Okay, my translation. Assertive romantic advances appreciated by a woman as an expression of love. Love is the key element. Without love, it doesn't matter how aggressive a man is or not aggressive in pursuit of a woman. If there's no love there, there's no way a healthy woman will like it. So aggression means both things, but Prabhupada is conflating them. A man is always famous for his aggression toward a beautiful woman, and such aggression is sometimes considered rape. Well, that sometimes is not what men are well known for raping women, aren't they? Okay, sadly, that is the state of affairs. So, but too often this statement is taken by men, even in the movement, to simply mean, well, all women, they like to be, aggressively pursued and pursued in assertive ways, romantic gestures, seduction, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, first of all, how do you know all women like that? Only a woman will like that if she feels loved. Love is the key thing. And frankly, a man might also like the same thing in reverse. How about that? Some men like to be pursued by a woman. So this is not necessarily, again, these statements are so general, they're so faulty. But what Prabhupada is trying to say in his own way, with his vairagya carelessness, is that, look, yes, that is law always, he says. Rape means without consent, sex. Otherwise, there is no rape, which means there is consent. So Prabhupada knows what the word rape means. It's not that he was using it carelessly in terms of definition. He knew what it meant, but he also recognizes that women at a certain very dark level and men at a very dark level engage in this very sick activity. And frankly, pornography, if you look at the stats about pornography, 80% of pornography is violent. And 30% of viewers of pornography are women. I think Prabhupada's talking about those people. So, again, Prabhupada looked at the grunge of the material world. I mean, the grunge. In fact, I used to, when I first was listening to Prabhupada and his discourse, I used to think, oh my God, he is speaking so harshly about the material world. I grew up with such privilege, and I wasn't around too much bad stuff until, I was abused once in a high school, but that's a different issue. But he just spoke so harshly about the material world. It's such a dismal view. But you know what? When you look around, to be honest, it's pretty bad. It is pretty bad out there. But it's also pretty good out there too. And Prabhupada says there are sattvika relationships. There are men and women that can have, and we all know men and women who are not devotees, who are very decent, good, naturally good people. So, Prabhupada meant what he said. Don't try to undo it. But he meant it in a very particular way, in a very dark fashion. And frankly, Prabhupada did not have much faith in male-female relationships. He didn't have a particularly good one of his own, which he admits himself. I mean, my relationship with my wife is about 20 times better than anything I've ever heard he ever had with his wife. I'm just saying here. And, Prabhupada, why we are hankering after loving, Prabhupada says, because there is love in Krishna. We are worshiping here Radha Krishna. Or originally, there is love. Therefore, we, being part and parcel of God, we are also trying to love. A man is trying to love another woman. Woman is trying to love another man. That is natural. This is not artificial. Do you hear Prabhupada loud and clear? Listen to that. Here's another one. That's in Srimad Bhagavatam. Oh, that's a lecture, Srimad Bhagavatam. Nectar of devotion. The basic principle of the living condition is that we have a general propensity to love someone. Listen to this. No one can live without loving someone else. Listen to these words. Prabhupada knew this propensity is present in every living being. And then you'll find a quote, well, there's no love in this material world. But now we understand, right? Now we understand the paradoxical nature of Prabhupada's discourse. Sorry, I went on a bit long there.
No, thank you so much, Prabhu. It was very, very insightful. And I think I appreciated that you were saying that we should acknowledge that Prabhupada knew what he was talking about, because that is one approach that devotees sometimes take, is they say that, Prabhupada didn't mean, rape as we, it didn't have the same meaning as we have to the word today, etc. But I think one thing that came to my mind, I think sometimes as devotees, we have the tendency to categorize certain activities as inherently bad or inherently like tamasic. And I think when it comes to physical intimacy, that might be also that tendency in the devotee community. You just have like sex life and it's just all thrown into like one category, like, sex life, and it's degrading and it's bad. But I think realistically speaking, any activity which we engage in, it's going to be on a scale, starting from the mode of ignorance, moving up, to sattva guna, and then moving to transcendence. So I think we've got to acknowledge, that it's not always going to be expressed in the same way between individuals. And if we look at the world today, as you rightly pointed out, if we look at something as, for instance, pornography and many other things that are going on, we cannot deny that certain people actually derive unhealthy forms of pleasure from very aggressive interactions with their partners. I mean, we don't have to go into details because, we have a devotee podcast, but that is a reality in our world. So given that, I think we can at least say that Prabhupada was right in that, in saying that certain individuals would actually, enjoy that as a result of their very, I would say, very unhealthy consciousness, as you pointed out. So I think that is true, and I think it's very important that we see it in that perspective, and we see that it's not a generalization that can be applied to everyone, because whatever you enjoy and appreciate is directly going to be determined by your level of consciousness. So I think I think that is a very important I think that's a very important point for that whole topic. But thank you so much for shedding light on it. I know that Dee wanted us to move on to another.
Yeah, so I think we touched on this, and my question was going to be about, so you, towards the very end, you mentioned that, the Bhagavatam says that no one can live without loving somebody, and you also mentioned yourself, then Prabhupada in some point mentioned that, relationships in this material world is not transcendental. It's all about women seeking pleasure and males. So essentially what he implied was that in this material world, there's no proper love. Essentially, it's all about gratifying our senses. So, and we just touched on how obviously the shastras probably may kind of contradict this point. So just wondering whether you wanted to touch upon this point, because somebody watching this they could easily interpret, or a quote like this could easily be interpreted as, you see some devotees classing, like Srila implied, just like, sexual relationships are all about, in the mode of ignorance or the passion, all love is just mode of ignorance. Or there's no, if you're not loving Radha Krishna, personal relationships between two individuals is all in the mode of ignorance or passion. So therefore we should just, if it's not Krishna prem, and if it's not Radha Krishna, love for Radha Krishna, that is materialistic, therefore is not relevant. So how do we see statements like this? Because surely, what is this world without love? And love comes in all different ways, shapes, and forms. So I was just
Yes.
wondering if you could quickly touch on this point, whereby Prabhupada mentioned that in this kind of material world, there is no love. There's no such thing as, true love, essentially, in the material world.
Yes. Beautiful. Okay, Dee. Excellent. Okay, a few things to respond immediately. One is that Prabhupada always spoke, when he says there's no love in this material world, at least he always spoke about dormancy, the dormant love of God that we all have. So whether we are purified of heart, or whether we're still carrying the impurities of the heart, or the hridrogam, the disease of the heart, or not, there is that dormant propensity to love. And so Prabhupada explains that in the Nectar of Devotion preface. He explains that elsewhere in many places, and he uses that phrase, dormant love of God. He uses that, about a couple hundred times throughout his statements. Now, it is true that most devotees, and I've heard this, again, I won't mention names, very old friend, sannyasin, very famous in the movement. I was on my way to India, and we sat together and for hours, and I was going to give a paper. I told him what the paper topic was, but he said, well, my understanding, okay, I'll give you the name of the topic. The title of my paper was The Ubiquity and Scarcity of Love. Comparing the Bhagavata statements about prema and our Vaishnava theologians about prema. There seems to be a disparity. Prema, on the one hand, according to the Bhagavatam, the word is used in all of its nominal and verbal derivative forms. Prema is ubiquitous. I mean, prema's there in between even an animal and an animal. What to speak of a human and an animal, and what to speak of the human and divinity. I mean, so it seems to be everywhere. And at the same time, our Vaishnava theologians hold the word prema as an extremely rarefied, exalted state that is very difficult to attain. So which is it? Well, when I say which is it, that's the fallacy of the false dilemma. Okay? It's not one or the other. It's both. The natural propensity to love grows and matures and becomes purified in this world, especially if we are bhaktas, because bhaktas, Krishna sends all the perfect relationships we need to learn how to love, and how to love better, and to learn how to love much. So typically, devotees think that any love in this world is simply lust. The only true love is love for Radha and Krishna. Wrong. Simply wrong. Here, I'll give you the definition of love from Prabhupada himself. Okay, you ready for this? Let's see. Very simple. It's a lecture given in New Vrindavan in 1976. To love means to be concerned for the other's benefit. That is real love. I love you for your benefit. You love me for my benefit. If I so-called love you for my benefit, that is lust. In this material world, there cannot be love. Okay, so he ends with that bit of theological punctuation. Okay, and so in other words, he's saying that there can't be a way to love someone for their benefit. Well, you know what? That's counterintuitive. I see people loving each other for their benefit. Does that mean their love is pure all the time? No. You both are in another country. About 15 years ago, there was a man on in the New York subway, standing on the platform with his little girl, holding the hand of his little girl. A handicapped boy fell into the track, and there was an oncoming train. This man, there were many people on the platform. This man let go of his little girl, jumped into the tracks. There was no time to pull him out. He made sure that his limbs were between the two rails. He pressed him down with his body. The train came, unloaded and loaded. The train left. They both got up, and he saved the boy. Now you might say, well, that was stupid. He has a little girl. What if he died? You might criticize him. But in my book, that was loving someone for their benefit. Human beings have a capacity to love. We do. In fact, human beings have an extraordinary capacity to love. And in fact, in bhakti, this is where we get to develop the ultimate capacity for the heart's love. So that's what we're about. That's what our whole tradition is about. It's a tradition of the heart. Really, everything else pales by comparison. Whether a woman should do this or a man should do this, or intelligent this, intelligent that, all these discussions are simply a distraction if we let them be. But let us absorb those things from Prabhupada as he wanted to tell us and sort of warn us about the kind of grunge of this world. And then let me state this. Some devotees approached me about Prabhupada's very condemning statements about Africans. Africans are less intelligent. Okay. They were troubled. In fact, one very dedicated devotee said his son can hardly listen to Prabhupada because he knows that Prabhupada makes these statements. How do I explain this to my son? I said, well, consider that Prabhupada is like a diamond. And he comes from a world of diamonds. And this diamond came down from that world of diamonds. But when a diamond comes from that world into this world, a diamond, like every wonderful, beautiful stone, gem, has to take, it has to take prongs. There have to be prongs. Every prong, of course, the better the stone, the lighter the prongs, but the prongs can't be too light because it has to support the stone. So what occurs is that the prongs block part of the gem. Those prongs are the conditions in which Prabhupada enters this world. Whereas, take myself, I never came from a world of diamonds. I am, or was, and probably still am, a diamond in the rough, coming out of all those igneous rock formations, And, as you may know, a diamond can only be cut and formed with another diamond. So Prabhupada is cutting into our diamonds to make us perfect diamonds. So when Prabhupada makes a mistake, a so-called mistake, or misjudgment, or whatever, one of these vairagya, carelessness mistake, statements, he's doing that on a totally different level than whenever I make a mistake. When I make a mistake, D, you should correct me. Don't let it go by, oh, Garuda's this diamond that fell from the spiritual. I'd love to convince you of that. I don't think I'm able to convince you of that, honestly, okay? I'm arising from igneous rock formations that produce this little diamond that has inclusions. But Prabhupada's miracle is to be able to even erase the inclusions that any of us have. Because of bhakti, the power of Krishna bhakti, Radha Krishna prema. This erases even the inclusions, the impurities, the imperfections of this diamond. So it's a little bit like when a parent makes a mistake of a child. The child spills the water on the table. But that's out of carelessness, and not able to control his or her limbs, whatever. But the parent may knock over the water to catch the child. Well, spilling the water, the same water was spilled. But you can't say that the child's spilling the water is the same as the parent spilling the water. So I can't afford to make the sort of so-called statements, troublesome statements that Prabhupada makes, because I'm not an ambassador from the spiritual world. So we have to put things in perspective, I think. We are like igneous diamonds, you and I. Well, actually, you know what? I can't really speak for either of you. You may have dropped from the spirit. For all I know, you might be the most precious diamonds coming from the spiritual world. But even if you do, Prabhupada does say, an Uttama Bhakta has to take the position of a Madhyama Bhakta. And a Madhyama Bhakta has imperfections, whereas the Uttama Bhakta remains in a perfect realm. But to come down here, the prongs of a diamond represent a condition, not that he is conditioned, but he's working within conditions. There's a difference. I'm the one who's conditioned by the igneous rock formations. He is unconditioned, but comes down into the conditions of the prongs that hold the diamond. So it comes from India, colonialist and post-colonialist India. His country saw that Hitler was, a friend to India. Well, Hitler wasn't a friend because anyone who would get rid of the British was a friend to India, and you can understand. I mean, they were dominated by the British for 200 years. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So, so on. So different perspectives. Those are the prongs, but the diamond is what we have to focus on.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you for the very beautiful analogy with the diamond and the prongs. But I mean, some people could still argue after listening to us, for nearly an hour and a bit.
Yeah.
You're just making. I'm just playing devil's advocate. You're just making excuses. You said Prabhupada knew when he mentioned the word rape. He knew the meaning of it. He still decided to use it. Understanding. The 21st century person thinks very different. We're not scholars, we're not elevated, and most people that come across these statements wouldn't know the concept, context in which these were taught, spoken, and also the point that you made about him being a sannyas. For him, these kind of social concepts really didn't matter as much. For him, it was Krishna prema and bhakti was his interest. So it was these careless mistakes that you mentioned. So people could just say you're just making excuses for Prabhupada's careless statements. So how can you then kind of refute that point, and also how can we not make that stop from somebody actually then taking Prabhupada seriously as a spiritual master? Some
Yes.
people could really distance themselves and say, this guy said these kind of things, and do I want this person to be considered as my spiritual master? So I
Yeah.
mean, how would we address that kind of?
Yeah.
I'm just playing devil's advocate because somebody could easily say you've just given an hour and a half of frankly excuses.
Right. Yeah. Good. Okay. Excuses would be tantamount to saying, look, don't be so hard on Prabhupada. Okay. I mean, he was old. Do you know what it's like to travel around at age 70 and 82? And when you've got a heart condition and diabetes and whatnot? I mean, I can make excuses, what are you going to be like at 70 with a heart condition? And I mean, I can make excuses. That's an excuse. Explanations are to deal with the theology itself and to find out why Prabhupada had such a flippant attitude toward the material world, as he called it, because he did. That was his own relationship with this phenomenal world. He frankly found it a lot of times a pretty ugly place, a very compromising place. And I don't feel I'm making excuses. I feel I'm being very straightforward. In fact, I think there probably would be some God siblings of mine who might find what I'm saying perhaps very offensive. But I am a scholar. I have to be true to what is on the page. I have to be true to the theology. I'm not here to make excuses. Though I could be D, you're perfectly right in bringing that up as a possibility. Excuses would be to try to just kind of like, let's not look at this. Let's not give it any attention. Let's just go back to the really important stuff. Well, I do say, let's go back to the important stuff, but also let's understand, this mastermind of the worldwide Krishna movement, why he would say stuff like this. And I really think he was demonstrating more than anything else with hyperbole and dramatic, overstated, overreaching statements. And Prabhupada is not unintelligent. I mean, Prabhupada knows he was enacting a kind of flippant and dismissive behavior toward the material world, but he never exhibited that toward matters of Krishna bhakti. Never. Oh, we have a question here, do we?
We do, Prabhu. But before we get to the question,
yes,
I just wanted to share one thought that I had when you were, speaking a little bit earlier about Prabhupada's statement, there's no love in the material world, what came to my mind is that Prabhupada also said that Vrindavan is a state of consciousness, which means that, being in the material world is also a state of consciousness. So I think we can say that in certain states of consciousness, there is no love. But in other states of consciousness, it doesn't matter where you seem to be, physically, there can be love. But I think the propensity to love depends on your state of consciousness. And I think we can see that as a person's consciousness evolves, their capacity actually to love increases, exponentially. Like we see how
Yes.
many people Prabhupada loved. Prabhupada was in the material world and he expressed love, for so many
Yes.
individuals. So that's something that came to my mind. Like maybe we can say there's no love in material consciousness.
Okay. Let's look at that in your statement in light of Bhagavad Gita. So Arjuna had a total breakdown. He had a shattered heart. He was trying to deliberate what would be the right thing, what would be the wrong thing, what would be the worst wrong thing or the worst right thing, or, he tried everything. He deliberated and he finally just had a meltdown. He broke down. And this is the launch of the Gita. And this is symbolic of the human condition. A shattered heart, impoverishment of the heart. So he could not act with any kind of strength. He lost his strength. His knees buckled. He fell to the ground, into the seat of his chariot. Now, by the end of the Gita, it is only then in 1863, chapter 18, verse 63, he says in that point, he says, now you've heard everything. Now you so choose as you will. Now you can decide. Because yes, Sharadiya Rasa, his consciousness was lifted up. He was filled with knowledge and his heart was open once again. And he finally recognized who is standing right in front of him. All the blessings he had right in front of him. Bhagavan Sri Krishna, right in front of him. Well, he was still in front of him in the first chapter. Do you remember? He hardly said a few words, more than a few words in the first chapter. Krishna was just observing this breakdown. So the heart, so awareness, yes, Sharadiya Rasa, that as we become more aware and as our consciousness becomes purified, but our heart, the chitta, madchitta madgata prana, place your heart, the heart's awareness on me, madchitta madgata, have your very life breath come to me. Then bodhayanta paraspara. Then we can cause one another to be enlightened. So that's, of course, what I appreciate about both you and both of you, Dee and Sharadiya Rasa. Your whole podcast is about bodhayanta paraspara. And each of us brings to this forum the madchitta madgata prana, which hopefully fills us up, our hearts and our very life breath, with the ultimate, goal of a devotional life. And these statements, these kinds of facing these kinds of difficult statements, becomes possible. I think that's what we're trying to say. That it becomes possible, and very worthy.
Thank you, Prabhu, for that. We've had a few questions, conscious of the time, but we wanted to pick up a few questions from the audience. And Mary Leona, and I believe this is one of your god sisters, dear Manjuali, she's mentioned one question saying, is some of Srila Prabhupada's attitudes towards women cultural of this time?
Okay, those are the prongs. That's exactly what the prongs are of the diamond. When an Uttama Bhakta comes to this world, he or she will land into a setting. We talk about, I'm no jeweler, but I know that you talk about the setting, the jewel, right? In the ring, it's the setting. So that's what it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. He spoke from that setting. It's not that he was conditioned, but he found himself in a conditioned circumstance. Desha Kala Patra, Prabhupada always talked about. Desha, the history, the place, the place, the social circumstance, the political ones, the personal, psychological ones, the kala, the time, the history, and all that the history brings forth. Patra, what kinds of influences are around us. It doesn't mean that the Vishuddha Bhakta is conditioned or getting conditioned, but rather he's speaking from that conditioned platform. But he's never compromising the ultimate teaching. And he doesn't want us to either. He doesn't want us to. Just as he didn't want, just as Krishna didn't want Arjuna to think that the whole teaching was about detachment from the fruits of your activities. So look, go kill these soldiers because you don't care about them. Just kill them, because whether you kill them or not, it's just the fruits. You're not supposed to enjoy the fruits anyway. And that's what I'm teaching you. And that's the whole teaching of the Gita. Wrong. Okay, so we shouldn't take part of the teaching as if it were the whole teaching. Rather, we should take the whole teaching to understand the part. So yes, those are the prongs. Exactly. Attitudes toward women. That was part of his time. It was part of what was going on around him. And you know what? We have those kinds of conditions here. At the beginning of this talk, I didn't know what gender to use. These days, I don't know what to say. They, he, she, whatever. And that's fine. The most important point is to love others and to worship at the altar of their hearts, and not to consider them a he, she, or they in the ultimate sense.
Thank you, Prabhu, for that wonderful answer as always. Shraddha, you wanted to pick up another question?
Yes, so earlier we were speaking about, women in leadership and Prabhupada's comments in related to that. And then Harini Priya, I'm not sure if she's still with us, but she asked, if things have moved on, why aren't there more women in leaders in temples and communities? So I think she was basically referring to, we've seen that in the world, we can say, okay, the outside world, we have more and more women, in leadership positions in all different fields. So why don't we see that? Because I do agree with her. We don't see that reflected within ISKCON. Let's say in the democratic world, we don't see the position of women in society actually being reflected within ISKCON. So why is that the case?
Well, in my unhumble opinion, I'll qualify my statement before I make it. I'm sorry to say that I think that the movement is terribly misogynistic. I honestly think that there are too many men that enjoy this idea of keeping women in submission. And I find that repulsive. I remember back in the day in the Boston Temple, when I was first years at Harvard, I remember that women were trained to run into the corner of the staircase if a man was walking up the stairs. I remember that women had to cover their heads, not just, in a kind of reasonable way, but you couldn't see their faces. when I first was moving in, I experienced this, and I said, "I'm sorry. Is there something wrong?" I asked her, and she wouldn't answer. She was trained to do this. I said, "Oh my gosh." I said, "We've got a lot of work to do here." Well, not only did I change that all around, literally the next day, I completely, this is not going to stick. Okay, this is not going to happen while I'm here. And there was a brahmachari who was in charge of the temple, and although he did not set those rules, it was actually a grihasta prior to him. But I said that this is so because he was a brahmachari, he let me be in charge of the grihastas and the women. And I met with all of the women and the grihastas, and I said, "There'll be no more of this. This is not what Prabhupada. This is not Prabhupada's mood. He loved all of his children. There's no one here that's inferior or superior." So I changed that around, and not only did I change that around, I actually trained only those women who are interested in how to give Bhagavatam class, how to give Sunday feast lectures. And it was unheard of back then, except for the rare, Jadharani. She was allowed to, because of her, utter seniority, but that was about it, But I had all kinds of women, and I objected to this. Women used to be on one side of the temple room and men on the other side in front of the deities. Then there was a point where they got pushed to the back. Well, that was a little harder to change, but being a rebel that I am, I used to stand in the back on the edge of where the women started, And so it was very funny to see the brahmachari or the devotee, the younger devotee at the front, get the ghee lamp. And, he invariably would be looking for the most senior people, right? And he was like looking around. What I thought is we should all put numbers on our chests of how many years we've been in the movement. So such a devotee would not be bewildered by, exactly to whom they should offer the ghee lamp first. Anyway, he'd have to come all the way back to the women's section to give me the ghee lamp because I was one of the most senior people there. So it was, I found that very humorous and probably obnoxious, but I'm a rebel. I don't agree with this kind of misogyny. I don't agree with how women have to always be somehow subject to, a man's approval or something. The women in this movement are so talented and so devoted. They would actually be able to, I think, draw people more to loving Krishna bhakti than a lot of the men, frankly. So, and of course, then you get the other problem. Time for Sankirtan, time to send the women out for collections. Okay, get all the pretty young women to go out. So that's, again, another form of misogyny. Why is it only the pretty women that go out, the young ones? Everyone can go out. It has nothing to do with pretty or handsome. It has to do with how much love we have for the bhakti process and how much we can convey that love and share that love with others. That's what it has to do with. And again, the men in charge would typically use the women to go out and use their femininity for the army guys. I don't like this. Anyway, that's my obnoxious response to my unhumble response.
Prabhu, thank you for that. There's a follow-up question that kind of really links up from really dovetails with the point you've just made. You clearly said, in your opinion, I'm just stating your opinion, ISKCON is misogynistic, and you've set out examples as to why you think that's the case. Helen Hudson has just mentioned that, as you have stated, the question is, where did this begin? So it'll be interesting to understand, because we all know Prabhupada didn't I know we've discussed some very controversial statements. However, speaking to senior devotees, they would all say where Prabhupada really didn't disencourage women, based on their gender, frankly, of doing any service. So if Prabhupada was really such a champion of ladies and treated all disciples equally, where did these things of women, having to cover their heads, hiding behind a stairway when a Prabhu came down the stairs? So where did this all start?
I think it started. I was for 3 years, Yamuna Devi, the original one, the Yamuna Devi. She came to live in the area in which I was residing, and we used to have programs together, morning programs, and every day. And we were very close friends for 3 years. And then she moved on, and I moved on, and so on. And, she was very attached to Prabhupada. She was very attached to Prabhupada's personal interactions. And I hope she won't mind my saying this. But wherever you are, Yamuna, I say this to help others understand. She said that, honestly, if she had known that Prabhupada would have made all these statements about women, she never would have joined the movement. She was very discouraged by that. And she was also very discouraged by the kind of misogynistic behaviors toward women that she experienced directly to her. And, I just find that terribly sad, very sad, when I hear things like this. And honestly, Prabhupada's statements about women and Shastric statements about women certainly don't help. And I think it's about a further need to translate Prabhupada's translations and Prabhupada's thought. I believe Prabhupada's gifts of Krishna Bhakti need further systematization and clarification. For example, what I told you about the necessary corollary to women are less intelligent than men. I gave you a whole, revamping of that and the necessary corollary to that. Because theologically, it doesn't make sense to just leave it at that. It's a theological fallacy to simply insist on that. So what responsible disciples of Prabhupada should be doing is writing works that offer deeper clarification of what Prabhupada is ultimately saying without simply allowing these statements to float around and to be then imbibed by men who are too ready in their insecurities to mistreat women. There's already a tendency in men to mistreat women. I hate to say it, and I don't mean to denigrate my species, but the fact is, if you look at the stats out there in the world, there is a great tendency for men to mistreat women, either extremely or partially, So that's going to be transferred into the movement. It's going to be dovetailed, if we can even call it that. And there's no place for dovetailing that. There's absolutely no dovetailing misogyny and misuse or abusing anyone, male or female, in the movement. There's no room for that. Absolutely no room. So where did it start? It started with Prabhupada. But it's not just Prabhupada. It's the way we take Prabhupada. We bear the responsibility of how this, community, this society, the international society should move on. But I have godbrothers who tell me he even introduced his wife. He's American, his Indian wife. He introduced his Indian wife. He said, "Here's my wife. She's a very, very good Shudra. Very good Shudra." Excuse me? Wait a minute. I don't see people as Shudras or Brahmins. I see people as Bhaktas, as Vaishnavas or Vaishnavis. He introduces his wife as a very nice Shudra, very good Shudra. Do you see? This is someone who's been around for 50 years. Do you see what I'm talking about? These people are very stuck. They're not practicing bhakti, not in the fullest sense.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much. I think you have definitely given us so much to think about and reflect, and I think that's definitely something that devotees should be doing increasingly. Is be introspective and understand the statement in relationship to the greater philosophy being taught by Śrīla Prabhupāda. And I just wanted to share one last thing that came to my mind when you mentioned the ladies had been trained to not only cover their heads but cover their faces, and also kind of almost melt into the wall when men passed by. What came to my mind is that there are different tribal societies, for instance, in Africa, where it's quite warm, where the people, including the women, basically, walk around naked. They've got very limited, coverings on their bodies. At the same time, those societies, aren't promiscuous societies. Those societies, maybe they, maybe there's polygamy, but they're still monogamous. It's still people are still actually interacting with each other according to Dharma. And it's interesting, in those societies, you'll see a woman and she won't be covered, where we expect a woman in the Western world to be covered. But in that society, the woman's body is just not sexualized. The
Right.
woman's breasts not being covered is, it's just seen as a sign of motherhood. So I find that very interesting. We sometimes have this idea that the solution to inappropriate attraction is to just cover the body more and more.
Right.
That's not really the solution, because we can sexualize any part of the body, and
That's
we
right.
can sexualize women. And if we are sexualizing women, no matter how much she covers her hair, no matter how, where she stands, even if she stands outside of the temple room, if you have sexualized her, it's always going to be an issue within
That's right.
your consciousness. And we can think about, on the other hand, we've got in Asian culture, I think if I'm correct, China, there was this, these class of ladies, geishas, who were, maybe we should not say prostitutes, but they were at least, there was some type of consorts, for
Right.
men in that occupation. And they are covered from head to toe. I mean, even their faces are painted. But those ladies are so sensual.
Yeah. Right.
And again, it's the state of consciousness, and it was their profession, so they had to do it. So I find it very interesting, this idea that to solve the problem, which is inappropriate attraction or lust, whatever, tell the women to cover themselves, tell the women to stand at the back, tell the women not to give class, and thinking that somehow, that's gonna be the solution. So I find that quite fascinating, as if we cannot understand where's the real issue here.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
because we can't see where's the real issue, we can't really see what is the real solution.
Yeah. Well, I think in your presentation, you gave the solution. It's a matter of consciousness. The sari is considered in the movement a very chaste form of dress. Well, I've seen some women wear the saris, and they're out there trying to catch a fish. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're wearing a sari. And then I've seen women wear very simple, non-devotional clothes, maybe not acceptable in terms of, maybe they're tighter or not so as loose as whatever. But the person involved, a very just higher consciousness. So it really has to do with that. Like you said, Shardiya Rasa, it's about your attitude, your behavior. It's all about motive, right? Haitoki apratiyata bhakti, right? Haitoki. Where is our mind and heart? What are our motives? And the fact is, if you're, if a young woman or a young man is, very sort of hormonally wild or active, it's going to come out in your clothing. I don't care how nicely you put on your dhoti and your kurta. I don't care. I've seen some brahmacharis dress. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, paka. I mean, they dress so well. I mean, I might as well give them jewels to wear. What is the dress all about? Hopefully, dress is something that reflects something of our consciousness that we feel okay in being in. When I teach at the university, I don't wear my bathing suit. Honestly, I just don't go in my bathing suit. It's just not appropriate. Nor do I go in a tuxedo. So there's a context sensitivity in dress. In fact, I've only worn a tuxedo once in my life, and it was at the 50th anniversary gala of a 50th anniversary event for ISKCON in Washington, D.C. And Anuttama, called me up and said, Garuda, I think, you're giving the keynote, one of the keynotes at this very fancy, dinner event and so on. And he said, I think you need to wear a tuxedo. I said, Anuttama, I'm just a scholar. I mean, we scholars don't wear tuxedos. We just, wear we're not. He said, no, I think you're going to have to wear a tuxedo. I said, well, how can I wear He said, Ambarish is going to speak right after you, and he's wearing a tuxedo. I said, oh, gosh. Oh, okay. So my wife and I go and figure out how to rent one, So I get to the event, and Ambarish and I are hanging out. We've known each other for a long time and well. And I said, well, you look pretty good in a tuxedo, Ambarish. I'm glad that, you had one because Anuttama said you were going to wear one, so I had to wear one. So thanks a lot, He said, Anuttama told me that you had one and that I borrowed this from my son-in-law. I said, oh my gosh. So Anuttama did something very clever. We laughed. We thought it was very funny because neither of us wanted to wear a tuxedo. But you know what? In looking back at the event, it was appropriate. It was. It was really a formal dinner. It was meant to impress all kinds of outsiders. And so, so it was appropriate, But Anuttama had to literally lie and trick us both into wearing it. And he knew what was right. So that was good. But dress is important. How one carries oneself, what one wears in the context. There's one devotee godbrother of mine who's really into this thing about Western clothing. And he went to Europe and he gave class in khakis on the asana. He went khakis, a t-shirt, and a baseball cap. I'm not sure that was exactly the right thing to do. On the other hand, Prabhupada, when Prabhupada was in New York and he saw a lot of some of the Bhaktivedanta Institute intellectuals get ready to go to a conference, we were all in our suits and ties, and Prabhupada said, oh, let them give class. So I gave class on the asana. Prabhupada wasn't giving class that morning, on the asana with tilak in my suit. So Prabhupada somehow delighted in the idea that we were all sort of in this kind of armor, incognito armor of some kind, but yet we're going out into the world presenting Krishna Bhakti. I guess he wanted the devotees to see that. So.
Thank you, Prabhu. Just one point I wanted to make, because we get very carried away about how women dress and the point about women being distractions. I think Sharadi very eloquently, as always, summarized the point about, because, somebody's essentially men aren't able to, control their senses or have that high level of consciousness. Then we have these situations where women are, asked to sit behind, cover their heads and what have you. But I think it's a quote, funny enough, I like to quote, it's not from from a bhakti perspective, but it's actually called The Great Sex Rescue: The Lies You've Been Taught and How to Recover What God Intended. And it's simply the point about needing to transform our hearts and minds. We always talk about transforming our hearts and minds to kind of empower us to embrace bhakti, but we don't talk enough about transforming the hearts and minds of the gentlemen or the prabhus to actually look at women properly. So the quote goes as, defeating lust is not about limiting a man's encounters with women. It is about empowering men to treat the women around them as whole people, daughters of Christ. The key to defeating lust is not to avoid looking at women, it is to actually see them. So it's just that idea about just not looking at a woman as just a woman, but actually looking to understand them. So in that way, people won't look at either genders just as their body, because we talk till the cows come home about we're not the body, but we're the soul. But
Yeah.
we get so hooked up about the body, but we don't really look at people
Yeah.
as they really are. So just
Yeah.
wanted to share that.
No, I appreciate that. And you talk about the cows coming home, which is one of our mothers, one of the seven mothers. Well, a woman, Prabhupada, said that we should look at other women as our mothers. But then you juxtapose that with the butter fire thing. Now, that gets really perverse. Either you're looking at other women as your mother, or you're looking at other women as butter melters. And if they're butter melters, why do you consider your mother a butter melter? I mean, it gets really weird. And, someone asked earlier, what is the source of this? Well, you see, men who are having trouble somehow dealing with their own gender identity or ashram identity or whatever, start just doing extreme things. Just like, let me just stay away from the butter melters. I mean, that woman over there, oh my God, I could be melted right here on the sidewalk. And, the threat, the impending danger that some men feel that women can mean for them is really not healthy, And unfortunately, the movement has provided ways for them to kind of support that unhealthiness. I'm afraid so. I've seen it. I've just seen it for too long. I've been around the movement 50 years. I've seen it. So.
Thank you so much, Prabhu, for being with us tonight. And thank you, Dee, for sharing that quote. I think that Prabhupada really embodied, not just looking at women, but seeing them in the sense of seeing, their feminine nature and seeing how it could help them to engage that in Krishna consciousness, but also ultimately having that vision to see them as an individual soul. I think that Prabhupada ideally wanted us all to, cultivate that vision. Whether we're men or women, we have to be able to see each other, because it's only when we're able to see each other that we can relate to each other, relate to each other properly. So Garuda Prabhu, it's been very, very inspiring again to have you as a guest. I'm aware we managed to cover all the topics that we were hoping to cover, but I think with you, the topics are kind of ever expanding. So I hope we'll have the fortune to definitely have more discussions with you. Is there anything you would like to say in conclusion before we greet our online audience, who I have to say has been very faithfully with us for over 2 hours now?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll just end by saying that one godbrother of mine was complaining about women taking too prominent a position and so on. Well, instead of trying to argue with him, I said, you know what? I hate it that Prabhupada has the voice of a woman every morning greeting the deities. I can't stand that. So I'm with you. And, and that shuts them up pretty quickly, I mean, if Prabhupada really was the same misogynist that so many of his disciples were, he would never have had Yamuna singing at the most important event of the day in greeting the deities. I mean, so I use that sometimes. Yeah, I said, you know what? I agree. I said, women are way too prominent, including that voice every morning. I can't stand it. I don't know what to do. And they begin to see how ridiculous they sound. So let us be ridiculous, and let's call it out when it's there. You and I, from whomever, but let's lift each other up into higher levels of understanding. That's why I appreciate so much you, Sharadiya Rasa, and you, Dee, for doing this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhu, for making it possible. We're very grateful for your time, and we're very grateful for everyone that joined us online tonight. And please do feel free to leave us more comments and questions, and also please feel free to let us know if there's specific topics you'd like us to address in the future with our guests. And also feel free to get in touch with Garuda Prabhu. I think the best way to get in touch with Garuda Prabhu is through your website. Is that correct, Prabhu?
Probably. And also I should announce that the ISKCON Communications Journal, my dear godbrother Tattvavid suggested I announce this. I'm writing on this issue of interpreting Prabhupada's difficult statements for an article in the upcoming issue of ISKCON Communications Journal. So this will be more laid out with specific quotes and support, something you can't do in a podcast. So
yes, I think such a resource would be immensely useful.
Great.
To share maybe like specific articles focusing on specific issues, because some of them is quite substantial topics, within themselves. So dear devotees, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We hope it was also enlightening for you, and we are also always open for your feedback and your suggestions, and we're looking forward to seeing you again, hopefully in 2 weeks' time. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.